How do you approach what you put out by yourself? Like how is there a strategic approach by it? And how did that get started? The decision to talk about the product or the company on your own account.
What I've seen from other founders and how I think about it, maybe how I think about it myself, is that there's three flavors of it that I tend to focus on, depending on what the week demands and what we're focused on. But I'd say one flavor that we've done quite a bit of over the years is like founder led. And this is one of those luxuries that I think smaller companies tend to have more of. It's like casual, almost intentionally unedited, like Loom videos or walkthroughs of stuff that we built or stuff that we're working on in the product. There's this element of tying the vision of where you're going with the product to the thing you just released. The second is about startups and what I'll call like founder wisdom. I don't like I don't love doing posts like that. I feel like that's the vast majority of founder content that I see. And sometimes I feel, who is this content really for? Like at some level, not throwing rocks at anybody, but I feel like I get tired, honestly, of reading a lot about like investor metrics and VC benchmarks and all these like weird, like ambiguous kind of messages around what it means to run a startup. I've been really interested in writing about recently is about kind of internal processes, like literally like the pragmatic elements of like how you do something at a company, because I feel like startups tend to do things that don't scale. There's some unintuitive logic in the processes that we use internally to do things like customer support. Big theme I've been focused on over the past few months has been founder led support. The idea that, especially if you're early stage, but even if you're not, that you as a founder should take a lot more time than you think to do customer support and to talk to users directly. All these unintentional things will happen for you as a result of doing that work. And it feels incredibly low leverage. And the traditional wisdom would suggest you really shouldn't be doing that. Our experience has been that it's been a really invaluable thing for us.
And how did you, for example, that topic? I think that's super interesting. How did you discover that was an interesting topic? Was it like your own itch, or was it also like you're getting feedback or get good engagement? Like, how much does that play a role?
I wrote this post that kicked it off where I was reading a bunch of LinkedIn posts and Twitter posts, and it's one of those things where you see one too many things in a row and you start to say, I don't like this, or there's something about this that doesn't sit right with me. And it was a mix of, there was this huge surge in popularity based on one person throwing out this idea that your SaaS product very likely doesn't need a free plan. There was this whole mantra that was being thrown out there, and there's definitely products out there that don't. And then inevitably the conversation shifted into the support burden and the fact that it was expensive or time consuming to support free users. And so I wrote this post that was about what I viewed as maybe my manifesto or thesis on why I think founder led support is really important, and why I think in particular you can't really underrate the value of both the feedback and connection that you get with users when you do that job directly. And it got a lot of engagement from a lot of people, including I think a lot of folks who had interesting perspectives on it, and also a lot of founders who feel similarly. And there's one person in particular who I really admire and who I think does a great job of talking about this stuff. She's not a founder, but she's was a support leader at Loom, a woman named Susana de Souza, and she's out of Portugal. And she had been banging this drum for a while. And I felt this was something we were really interested in. And so I started thinking more about like, how would I write about this more? Because it seemed like people were more interested in learning more about it. And so I started talking about our process and how we close the loop with users. And then that led to some engagement from Des Trainer, who was the founder of Intercom, because I mentioned that we use Intercom and Linear to run through this practical process. And then that led to me writing a blog post about what our process is and how we go through it. And I think like with a lot of things, sometimes you throw ideas out, and if something sticks a little bit, you say, oh, okay, let's pull this thread a little further and see what comes of it.
Yeah, and that's very cool. How do you justify the time that you spend on it? Like that you make those connections, or the other thing? Because it's something I didn't really consider before as well. Like the time you even spent, like yourself reading other people's stuff on LinkedIn, is it really worth your time? And then what comes out of your own, what you put on LinkedIn yourself? Is it these kind of connections and conversations, or do you see other benefits from it?
I've always viewed it more as a form of research and development for our brand. I think early stage companies, a lot of their brand and a lot of their sort of company, the knowledge of their company is based around how the founder shows up in the market. And I think there's an anti-pattern there, but I do think there's an important sort of element of that for early stage companies. So I tend to view it like the reason I spend time doing that is because I'm always curious to see how other founders are doing that job, how they talk about their brand, how they talk about their company, what types of topics they focus on, how much they pull their own product into it versus how much is general startup advice and where they find their swim lane. So I'm always just curious to see that. And then I think there's also benefit for founders in getting a lot of reps in the same way I think customer support is important. I think having experience directly, like not outsourcing the job of talking about your company or talking about what your users care about or what, the things that are important you think to the business or the processes that your team, uses. We have other folks in the company who love to write content like that, but I think giving yourself some reps on doing that kind of work is almost the reward in and of itself. I think one of the things we learned from that experience of just taking the support example is, hey, there's probably a whole like fleet of content that we could write that was just about how we do certain types of particularly customer support interactions at Reclaim. And there's probably like 5 other blog posts I could go write about all these subtopics that kind of leak out of the posts that I wrote originally. And I don't know if I'll write them or not. But I think a big part of how you justify the investment, in my view, is it's experimentation. It's learning how other people talk about how other founders do it and seeing what kinds of things work and giving yourself some exposure to, you know, forcing yourself to have to tell that story or talk about that thing or write that thing. So I don't know that it's
Yeah.
like for us marketing strategy so much as just like a thing that for me always is about learning and figuring out what works.
And I guess also because it's something we are also starting to do more often, and also with some customers, like a bunch of social posts can almost be a test or an inspiration
Yeah.
for what you're going to write the blog post, because the blog
Yep.
post is a much bigger investment, right?
No, definitely. Another example of that, and this is a mix of both social engagement as well as answering questions and support. But one of the things we just put out recently is this glossary on our website. And it's literally this compendium of productivity terms and calendar how to's and management terms. So it's really meant to be a mostly unopinionated sort of glossary of terms that you would find in the world of productivity or time management. And there were obviously like SEO motivations for doing that. There's a lot of good stuff that's going to come from it from an organic standpoint. But I think the way it emerged was I was going through all of these conversations and all of these like seeing all of this stuff where I was like, it feels like there's a real vacuum of knowledge around this set of topics. Like there's highly opinionated thought leadership type articles, and then there's literal technical how-to guides from Google or Outlook, but there isn't this glossary of terms around what the hell does this thing even mean and like how do you just define it without having to sift through like paragraphs and paragraphs of information. And so I think another benefit, and it goes along that same line of just like research, is I think it's also helped me to have stronger opinions on what kinds of content I think not only will have. I'm not the person who says, here's this keyword opportunity that we think is really valuable. We have people on the team who are much smarter about that than I am, but I can definitely at least what I can spot or see and what I think I can bring back into content marketing or brand marketing or product marketing is what are the things that we see as an opportunity, like a void where no one's really talking about this or no one's really writing about this in this particular way. So that's definitely something that I've experienced.
Are you mainly focusing on LinkedIn, or are you using other channels as well?
Mostly LinkedIn and YouTube, I would say, are the two kind of channels that I've spent the most time kind of being active in. I prefer the LinkedIn format. I just tend to like writing longer posts. I like to have some room and space to develop thoughts and think through things out loud. Twitter to me is a space I've never fully figured out how to be successful in, quite honestly. I feel like there's a very particular, almost like an ancient lore or a set of like unspoken rules that were decided on decades ago by the earliest users of Twitter. And they have internalized this sort of mantra of this is how you write a successful post on Twitter.
And is there anything on your radar where you're thinking, oh, maybe in the future, or TikTok or Substack or other things where you or your team are considering like, ah, should we go there?
Podcasting definitely has been on our radar for a while, and we have not gone down that road yet, primarily just due to resources and time.
Mm.
And this is more speaking to marketing to our potential like prospects and building kind of our own company's brand. I'd say TikTok and Meta, and really TikTok and Instagram more than anything, I think are great places to have like these kind of pithy, like stamped out videos that are all about what I would think of as like prosumer productivity topics. I think the other thing I really like about LinkedIn podcasts and even to some extent channels like YouTube and Substack is you get, I'd say, an audience that is a little more like our product and it's at its core is really about more than anyone else busy professionals. It's like people who are slammed with meetings, trying to like just carve out a bit of time to, make their work week, a bit more aligned to their priorities. And I think a lot more of those people hang out, at least when they're looking for information about things like Reclaim or when they're interested in learning about those types of topics. I think those folks just tend to be more prominent on those other channels. So not as much. We've done a little bit of experimentation there and probably could do more. But yeah, I would say mostly LinkedIn and YouTube have been our main focus.
Mm. No matter which way you take it, it takes time to create the post and everything. Do you have any tricks or time management tips for other founders who struggle to find the time?
I think the first element is having a habit or a routine and a sort of a benchmark for yourself of I will do XYZ. And I go through ebbs and flows on this, but I try to at least once or twice a week have something to say, have something provocative or interesting to say, or what I hope is interesting. And I use Reclaim to make it a habit, and that's great. But I think the other problem people run into is they're just afraid of the worst thing is having a thing that you post that gets like zero traction, like it just sucks to look at. And I think you have to be okay with that being an outcome. And you almost have to look at your winners and look at your losers and try to figure out like, what was it about the winner that worked? And sometimes it's really small things. It's like tone, like a little teeny bit of tone that snuck in there that made it come off as snarky or too cynical, or maybe it was too upbeat to the point of being too saccharine. There's this balance, and finding your own version of that, your own like authentic voice is hard, especially when there is this style, as I mentioned, especially with Twitter, where you've seen there's this way everyone talks and they all talk the same and they all use this same sort of like jargon, and you want to imitate that and find a way to imitate that. But I've had a lot more success just trying to find my own voice, even if sometimes it's different than the voice I maybe aspire to have. I think with blog post writing, I've always employed a strategy that I learned in high school called focus free writing, or just free writing. You can be focus free writing or free writing. And it's where you basically have this in the world of keyboards, it's a little different, but I still do it on paper because I think it forces you to feel like your hand cramping when you do it. But it's basically where the goal is to not stop typing. Basically, do not stop writing and don't judge what you just wrote and don't editorialize as you write. Just get all the ideas out. The goal is to have a full draft very quickly, and then you can go and editorialize, and then you can go back and reread it. Did this make sense? And sometimes you're not in the right headspace to do that. And so I think also there's a time of day thing to it. People need to find the time of day that kind of where they feel like they're the most able to do this. For me, it's usually in the evenings. That's where I feel like my brain's freest to think about this stuff. But I'm a big advocate of just like, you got to find time for it. You got to sit down and do it. And you got to be okay with the idea that it's probably going to not go well the first few times, or it might go well and not go well another time.
You clearly also have other people in your team who are also working on content. So how do you balance between what you write and post and what they do?
We try to do at our marketing stand up every day. We have a ship it. That's what we call it every day. And the goal is just the same way we as a marketing team should be saying something to the market every day. And the goal is there's always something for us to talk about. There's features that have been out for 2 years that lots of people haven't used. And there's things we can post around best practices there. There's blog content. There's product videos that we've done and walkthroughs that we've done. And it's usually one of the most fun parts of the morning is we'll have our stand up and then we'll spend the remaining like 20 or 30 minutes basically doing like a ship it, and we'll throw some ideas around and come up with something and post it. So the goal is when we have a designer on the team who will spin up an asset really quickly, or we've got folks who can like pull together something really, and it's just a little bit of workshopping. And it's nice because it also lets different voices come in and different people have different ideas that get summoned up. Sometimes what will come out of those discussions, whether in stand up or Slack or in the ship it process, is like, hey, this is something that I feel like Henry should write, or I feel like it should come from his personal account, or I feel like it'd be really cool if he could take 5 minutes after this to record a video about it. And sometimes those are about things that there's this funny, this kind of fuzzy border, especially with marketing, where there are things that really don't make sense, not because they're like legally risky or make your brand look bad or anything, but there are things that are just so much less impactful when tweeted from a corporate account, or when, for example, when people mention our product in social or give us love on the internet, like I usually go from my own personal account and respond to it. I think it is more impactful for me to show that there is a person who's listening and not like a social media manager who's using a corporate account. Even if I'm the one looking at the corporate account, I'd still post from my, personal. So there's not like a ton of coordination around it. And then sometimes I will propose things where I say, hey, I really want to do XYZ. And the way that the team can support me is by helping with, I'm going to record this video. And Molly, if you can edit it or take out my ums and ahs, that'd be awesome. And so sometimes it's an idea that I come up with, and sometimes it's an idea that we talk through as a group as something we want to ship or something we want to say. And we conclude that, hey, this is actually something that would make more sense if it were tweeted by, and not even necessarily me. Like sometimes it's like, we think one of the engineers who built this thing should do a demo, or we think that Patrick should talk about it because he's the most familiar with it. And so there's these kind of moments where I think that type of authenticity is the driver for it. And then it's really more about like the marketing team supporting that person however they can.
And just to be sure that I understand, because I love the idea, but so is the ship it meeting, is that specifically focused on marketing, or that the ship it part is also about other things like ship a feature or fix a bug? Or
it's just marketing. We have ship it weeks on the product front too, and we've done ship it days for product as well. But those are a little different. Those require a bit more prep because it's engineering work.
That's a really nice idea. Thanks, man.
It's great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for taking the time.
Take care.
Yeah, have a good evening.